As a pastor and as a church, how do you get the most out of a sabbatical? In this episode, I'm joined by Jay Fowler. Jay serves as the Midwest Regional Director at PastorServe. He's a certified coach who coaches pastors, consults churches, serves in crisis care. He's an ordained Anglican priest who has planted churches and pastored and served on churches for over 30 years. Jay has also coached many pastors and helped churches through the process of coaching around sabbaticals, and he has written the Sabbatical Prep Workbook. Together, Jay and I look at not only the value of a sabbatical for a pastor, but also the value of a sabbatical for the local church. And then we also explore some of the ways that you can actually get the most out of that sabbatical time, make it as effective, as impactful as possible for both the pastor and the church. Are you ready? Let's go. Hello, friends, and welcome to another insightful episode of FrontStage BackStage. I'm your host, Jason Daye, and every single week it is my privilege to sit down with a trusted ministry leader and to really tackle a topic that we believe will impact in a very positive way pastors and ministry leaders just like you. And we do all this in an effort to help ministry leaders really embrace a sustainable, healthy rhythm for both life and ministry. And that is the heart behind our show, FrontStage BackStage. And we are proud to be a part of the PastorServe network. And in fact, with every single one of these episodes, we don't only have a conversation, but our team also creates a toolkit to help you and your ministry team at your local church really dig in more deeply to the conversation at hand. And you can find that toolkit at pastorserve.org/network. Now, if you're joining us on YouTube, give us a thumbs up and take a moment to put your name and the name of your church in the comments below. We love to get to know our audience better, and our team will be praying for you and for your ministry. And whether you're following us on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform, please take time to subscribe or follow so you do not miss out on any of these great conversations. And like I said, I'm excited about this week's conversation. And at this time, I'd like to welcome Jay Fowler to the show. Jay, welcome.
Hey, Jason, good to see you.
Yeah, it's good to see you, brother. Now it's awesome to have you on the show because you and I are friends. We both serve at PastorServe, and so we have an opportunity to have lots of really cool conversations. And the conversation we're going to have today, we get to let everyone in on one of these conversations that we have about ministry and about really what does it mean for us to find rest in the midst of the busy, often hectic, chaotic at times life of a ministry leader. And so we're going to really look at this idea of sabbaticals and really not only what is a sabbatical, most probably in our audience are familiar at least with sabbatical, but Jay, you have invested a lot of time in your coaching as you coach pastors and ministry leaders around the country. Every day of the week, you're coaching a pastor, which is pretty awesome. But you've invested a lot of time in helping pastors and ministry leaders not only understand the value and the need of sabbatical, but actually helping them really get the most out of, when they make a decision to take a sabbatical, you really help them get the most out of that sabbatical, which is an awesome ministry. And you're within our PastorServe world, our team, you're like a sabbatical expert. So we always lean on you and we appreciate all the work that you're doing. But Jay, just to kind of start out, it seems like the idea of sabbaticals is kind of on the rise. More and more pastors and ministry leaders seem to be talking about them, and even church boards, elder boards are kind of, investigating, exploring a little more deeply. I know that you've seen that in your work. So, Jay, why do you think there is this kind of, I don't know if it's a resurgence, but there's more interest, it seems, in the idea of a sabbatical? Why do you think that is?
Yeah, that's a great question. First of all, I totally agree. There's a lot right now, especially. I think maybe the pandemic or something, but the last 3 years for pastors has really been hard. There's a lot of data out now because of Barna and other places that do good polling and surveys with pastors and stuff about how hard it has been, and pastors feeling tired, exhausted, questioning their call, questioning their ministry. And so I think people are pretty aware that it's been a tough 2 or 3 years and it's been hard on pastors.
Yeah, yeah, and Jay, you and I have talked a little bit about not only has it been challenging and difficult, but also there's kind of it seems like more of an acceptance to say it's okay to slow down. In fact, it's not just okay, right? It's like necessary to kind of unplug and slow down a bit. So do you feel like there's this maybe a deeper understanding of it may be a shift perhaps from, as pastor, you and I both have been lead pastors at churches. We've
Yeah.
served churches, right? So we know what it's like week in, week out, kind of nonstop. And it almost seems like there's been a shift or an understanding maybe that pastors just going nonstop and sacrificing for the kingdom is kind
Right.
of how we spiritualize it, right? Like that there's an understanding that's not healthy. Do you feel like there's a better awareness around that idea?
Oh, yeah, totally. I often think of our soul like a rubber band. And if you pull on a rubber band and it's kinda tight, there's some good about that. You can pluck it, it'll make music, you can sling a paperclip across the room, you can tie something together, right? So there's something about tension and stress that's okay in life, that's part of how we're productive, right? But when that gets pulled for too long, one of 2 things happens. Either it snaps, the rubber band snaps, or when you let go of it, it comes back, but it's sort of malformed. And
Right.
I think again, like, if you read the if you read the internet at all, you know about pastors who have snapped.
Yes.
That might look like ugly, anger outbursts. It could look like a moral failing. It could look like just quitting and walking away. The thing that people probably don't see as much is the malformed. The pastor that stretches and stretches and stretches and finally lets go, but his soul's just sort of malformed. He's tired. He has doubts. He's skeptical. He's disappointed, and that part is less easy to see for the public, but it's still very real. So again, I think for sabbaticals and the need for them, it's an understanding of the soul of a pastor. And I think more and more churches are saying, like, we don't want that. We don't want a
Right.
pastor that snaps, and we don't want one that's malformed. We'd like a healthy pastor. And so I think the pace that maybe the church was at for, wow, really 2 or 3 decades of just like, work, 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 grow, 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 work, 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 grow, 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 grow. I think we've seen that some of the fruit of that emphasis wasn't very healthy.
Yeah, yeah. No, I love that. I love that imagery because I mean, it just sticks in your mind whenever you talk about that rubber band, and I think it's so true. And I'm sure there are plenty pastors watching along who either feel like they've been under that tension for a long time, or they may feel like they're a little malformed, after it's
Yeah.
come back. And so with that, a lot of the work that you do, Jay, is you work specifically coaching pastors who are looking to go on a sabbatical, right? They have
Right.
an interest, and so and a lot of things I love what you do because not only do you coach them in their sabbatical work, but you even work with the church board. You'll even share
Mhm.
with the church board or the elders or whatever to
Mhm.
help them better understand not only the idea of a sabbatical, but how to make the sabbatical as effective as possible for their pastor, which I think so vitally important. So let me ask you, Jay, in your work in coaching pastors and even working with churches and sabbaticals, are there certain things that you have seen that might be, I don't know, misconceptions or misunderstandings that kind of you've seen time and again around the idea of a sabbatical, or things that maybe pastors or even churches kind of miss around the idea of a sabbatical?
Yeah. I think the biggest misconception for mostly like boards and even congregations is that a sabbatical is just an extra long vacation.
Mm,
And that can also be a problem for the pastor that they just think, I'm just so exhausted. All I want to do is get out of here and recreate or maybe quit. So
right.
that's the dark side, right? And so I think that the spiritual component of sabbaticals is often like missed or overlooked. And I think that's the most crucial part of it. So when you look at Moses and Elijah and Jesus, who had extended times away, those are spiritual leaders that we all look up to, and that spiritual time away for each of them was formative for their ministry. So for Moses, he goes off and has a long time away, and he kind of gets this picture of from God of what God's people are supposed to be like, and kind of nation building as a people of God, and that's really, really important. He comes back with kind of a plan for the way forward, not kind of a very specific plan for the way forward. For Elijah, he's discouraged, he feels defeated, he's isolated, he feels all alone. And that time away with God is a time of encouragement. God feeds him and gives him water and then speaks to him in this gentle whisper and encourages him. And that's so important. And sometimes spiritual leaders need that from the Lord, that word of encouragement. I love you. I care about you. I have not left you alone, you know?
All right.
And then for Jesus at the start of his ministry, he has his time in the wilderness. And that's a time when he confronts the devil, you know, Satan comes and tempts him. And I do think that often in sabbatical, it's a time when we slow down and we kind of face some of our demons. And that's really unpleasant. Most of us don't like to do that. And that's a reason people avoid sabbatical. Because in the back of their mind, they think if I slow down, I probably have to deal with stuff I don't like to deal with. Some of it's in me, some of it's around me that's been caused by me. And that's unpleasant work, but yet it's part of the soul growth and health that any spiritual leader needs. So I think that framing the sabbatical not as just an extended vacation, but an important aspect of a spiritual leader's life that needs to happen fairly regularly, and it needs to be a an extended period, you know, 3
Right.
months or something. I think that's the piece that gets missed, you know, is by all parties at times, that spiritual core of a sabbatical and how important that is for the life of the leader, and then subsequently for the life of the church that leader, leads.
Yeah, yeah, I love that, and just look at the biblical examples. I think so helpful, Jay, in that honestly, and the idea that oftentimes, as you said, when we think about sabbatical, sometimes we're thinking about this idea of unplugging and stepping away, and that's definitely, a piece of it. But there is kind of a proactive, piece of sabbatical, right? It's not just kicking
Yes,
back,
right.
and hoping God speaks to you, which is great and fantastic. There is that, right? There is that
Mhm.
rest piece that's important,
Yes.
but there is kind of a proactive, piece as well, and I think that's what you're kind of saying in this idea that, it's not just this extended vacation. So whenever a pastor is considering sabbatical, um, what are some of the pointers in regard to the proactive piece that you tend to kind of lean on? And I know like I said, you've coached multiple pastors in this. You've helped churches understand this. In fact, you've kind of written the book, to a degree, on this, the Sabbatical Prep Workbook, to help pastors as they're kind of preparing for a
Mhm.
sabbatical, which is fantastic. So, talk to us a little bit about some of those pieces that help that proactive, part of a sabbatical kind of come to be.
Yeah, that's really, really important. Like, that preparation time for the sabbatical is just as important as the actual sabbatical itself. And again, sometimes that gets overlooked for a variety of reasons. Sometimes the pastor is just so darn tired, they don't feel like doing any prep, and that's okay. Get the time away. God will use it even if you can't get the prep time in. But if you can get some preparation time in, it helps a lot. So, one of the things I like to do with pastors is help them think about, well, how are you doing? Really? How is the state of your soul? And so slowing down and really acknowledging that. Sometimes pastors know I am in desperate shape. Sometimes pastors go, I'm doing really great, and they're maybe not in touch with how they're really doing. Um, I remember when for I have had two sabbaticals, and the second one, I was I came home one day, and my wife challenged me and said, "Hey, you're angry and you don't even know it." I said, "No, I'm not. I'm doing great." She goes, "No, you're not. You're angry and you're short with all of us." I am, by the way, short all the time, but she meant short temper wise. And I said, "Okay, I need to take a look at that." So I wasn't even aware of where I was at. I needed somebody outside me to help me see myself. So part of preparation for sabbatical is to try as best you can to get a hold of how you're doing, you know? And then out of that, out of some of your need and some of the desires of your heart is to begin to set some goals. And so we have a process in that workbook that first helps you sort of get a state of how your soul is, and then has some really great questions that talk about like, when am I operating in the present from the pain of my past? So some reflective questions that then lead to, so therefore, what would be, I don't know, 3 to 5 goals for my sabbatical?
Yeah, that's good. And that, if I understand correctly, Jay, you often will coach pastors, not necessarily when they're in their sabbatical, although that can be a piece of it, but you're actually coaching them before they even get there, right? Because to
Mm,
really help them make this the most effective time possible, right?
yeah,
And so
absolutely.
so one of the tools that you use is the Sabbatical Prep Workbook, which you've written, and that helps them kind of piece together, and then you walk through that with them and help
Mhm.
them reflect on those things, and actually help them kind of determine what some of these goals might be for them.
Right, exactly.
Excellent.
Yes. So that's an important part of, like, making the most of your sabbatical, I think, is thinking like, "Okay, what do I need?" And I really encourage pastors to pray about it and say, "Lord, what do you want to say to me? What do you wanna do in me? How do you wanna meet me in this sabbatical? Lord, what are some areas of my life that need attention that have been neglected?" So to not just try to conjure it up on your own, but to enter into that relationship with the Lord and, um, ask him for guidance and direction on those goals.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. Now, one of the things I think's interesting when we talk about sabbaticals is I've often heard you may have heard this yourself, experienced this in pastors and churches that you're working with, that well, sabbatical can kind of work for a larger church, right? Because you have other staff that can fill in the gaps. But
Mhm.
hey, I'm a solo pastor. How could sabbatical ever work for me? So talk to us a little bit about this idea of is sabbatical only for the bigger mega churches that have a bigger budget and a big staff?
Yeah, that's a great question. And yes, I have heard that, and I have seen pastors in smaller churches go on sabbatical, but it does take some organization and some thinking. So I think in a smaller church, one thing that they can do is they can get committed to the idea of sabbatical, and they can begin to set aside some money every year and save up for that for their pastor. So if a sabbatical is once every 5 to 7 years, every year set aside a little chunk of change so that that pastor can get that sabbaticals, because one of the biggest hindrances to sabbaticals is finances.
Mm.
So the church, I think, should pay for their pastors, pay their salary while they're off, in that sabbatical period of time. So that means they also have to probably pay somebody else to come in and maybe preach or do some kind of leadership. In some church settings, they can find people that will do that preaching and teaching for free, that are maybe deacons or elders or other staff if they have other staff at the church. So that can solve that problem financially. But I do think it just takes planning and sort of permission. Yeah, and yeah, this is good for your pastor and good for your church. It's good for your church, which we can go into if you'd like. How is it good for your church to have your pastor go on sabbatical?
Yeah, yeah, I'd love for you to touch on that because I think that's one of the things that's helpful. Well, let's just say this, Jay. It's kind of it can feel odd for a pastor to go into his elder board or his church board and say, "Hey guys, I think I need to take a sabbatical. I think I need to take a couple months away, right? Or a few months away,
Right.
whatever it might be." So I think that is can be a hindrance. I know in conversations I've had, that can be a hindrance because how do you even kind of raise this topic without it being like everyone suddenly assuming, oh, there's something wrong with the past. There's something going
Right.
wrong. There's something right, or so that's even a challenge, I think, just to get over that first hurdle of even raising the conversation, right?
Yes.
So so talk to us a little bit about some of those pieces that help a pastor having that like you said, some of the ways that a sabbatical is good for the church as a whole, not just good for the health of a pastor, which we hope every church cares about the health of their pastor,
Right.
but they're looking at the big picture. So talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, yeah. So I think for one thing is it helps the church learn how to rely on the Lord to continue with the mission that God's given them. So I mean, it's important for churches to trust their pastor and rely on their pastor, but it's also good for them to remember ultimately the pastor of this church is the Lord Jesus Christ. He is the shepherd, and we can trust him to empower us to do the mission for a period of time, without our pastor here. So I think it allows people to step into relying on the Lord. They might even discover, wow, God can use somebody like me to do something. And that's a good thing for the church to do. Certain leaders might have the chance to lead more without the pastor there who does that leading normally. And again, not only just in serving and doing the mission for general everybody, but just for leaders in the church to step up and have the space to step up and lead and to try things on leadership wise. I think that's a really, really important thing that sabbaticals provide. It also reminds the congregation that their pastor isn't the Messiah. I just was reading in my devotional time today where the people go to John the Baptist and they go, "Hey, who are you?" And he says very emphatically, "I am not the Messiah." And it's important for pastors to know they are not the Messiah, and it's important for their congregations to remember that they are not the Messiah. They are human, they have limitations, they are finite, and they do need time to renew and rejuvenate their soul. So I think in that way, it just kind of like allows everybody to be more human, and I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I love that, and like you said, it's um, making space for God to move in a way that may not necessarily be there. If the pastor is still doing what the pastor's doing week in, week out, right? And so
Right.
that gives that opportunity for people, like you said, to step into some leadership roles, perhaps, or to flex some leadership muscles that they may not otherwise, and see what God does with that as well. So I think that's a beautiful kind of byproduct
Mhm.
and benefit of a sabbatical. If you were to, Jay, look back across the coaching that you've done over the years for sabbaticals and all the work that you've done in this area, what would you say are some of the greater challenges? Let's start with challenges. Challenges first with the
Mm.
actual, processing through and actually being on sabbatical for the pastor himself or herself. As they're on sabbatical, what are some of the challenges that they may not think that they're going to bump into, but they may bump into during that sabbatical time?
Oh, man, that is a great question. Um, Remember when I talked about kinda facing your demons?
Right?
Yeah, I think when we slow down and really slow down, we come to grips with things that are unpleasant in our soul. One of the first ones is maybe our over dependence on people's accolades and praise of us.
Mm,
So all of a sudden, you step away from everybody telling you, "Great job," "You're awesome." Along with that might be that need to be needed, that my whole life revolves around people needing me, or that like constantly available, so I'm constantly available to everybody else, and my identity gets all tangled up in all that. So I think that idea is the idea of, can I be okay without all of that? And it's like giving up an addiction at times, because we get fairly comfortable with
right,
something about ministry, and that's part of why we stay in it. There's something about it that feels good, you know? Like I said, the need to be needed or to be recognized or people saying, "Way to go," or "We love you." And when you cut that off for 3 months, that can be kinda scary. Is the Lord enough?
right,
Is really just being with the Lord and my family, am I gonna be okay? Is that gonna fill the cracks in my soul? So just I think wrestling with that is hard, and I wanna just say it's normal. It's really normal
right. Yeah,
to have that like, "Oh, I don't know if I'm okay leaving." I think that, another thing that can happen is that pastors can get away and go, "Gosh, is this a good fit for me? Is this the right place for me? Is ministry right for me?" So, again, that can be one of those things if you have a sabbatical coach, it's somebody you can process that with,
right,
and not to fear it. It's pretty normal to step away and say, "Gosh, I don't know what I think." Um, Another thing I think that happens is pastors will get away and say, "If I don't keep that level of workaholism going, will the church accept me?" On the one hand, will they accept a different kind of me, a kind of me that's a little more balanced? And secondly, will the church survive without
mm,
me overworking? So there can be concern about, when I come back, if I've changed, will people still love me? If I've gotten a little more healthy, will they accept that new me? And wow, can the church go without the overworking me? So those are, I mean, those are just really common things that pastors, if they're real honest about what's going on in their heart, that's in there. So you might as
Yeah.
well get it in the open, and it's normal. Another thing that sometimes happens is like skepticism, like doubts about your faith. And again, where else are you going to talk about that?
Right.
You know? Um, but clearly you see that with poor Elijah, he's just like, he's just roasted. And he goes away and pours out his heart. And I think their sabbatical can be a time for folks that they slow down, they go like, "Yeah, what do I really believe? Um, where am I at with the Lord?" And needing to process through things, at a deeper level. It's a time of dealing with disappointment, unanswered prayers. Pastors pray a lot,
Right.
and not every prayer gets answered. So again, just to slow down and say, "Okay, what am I going to do, Lord, with these things you didn't answer?" So a lot happens during a sabbatical that might feel like a surprise to a pastor, but all those things are normal. That's what's great about having a coach to go along and go,
Right.
"You're not crazy."
Exactly.
Like that's kind of normal when we really slow down. Some of these things start to catch up with us.
Yeah, yeah, and I love that, Jay, because it is that idea of that they might be unexpected, right? Because even as you were listing those off, as you listed off, it was in my mind, I was going, would that be something? That they were all kind of surprising, but then as you talked about them, they all make sense, right? So there's that
Yeah.
unexpected nature to it. But I love the fact that you're saying, hey, this is normal. Whenever you are unplugging, whenever you're really, stilling life, right?
Hmm.
Because that's what's happening in the sabbatical. You're
Hmm.
you're 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 stilling things around you, and that's whenever real deep work in the soul can often happen. And so it makes perfect sense. And there is um, that encouragement from you, Jay, that this is normal. This isn't, you're not
Hmm.
having some massive faith crisis. You know what I mean? This is what happens when we aren't going, and
Yeah.
being bombarded on every side. When we actually slow down and let the Spirit work in our hearts. So it's super encouraging. Now, Jay, you've shared a lot, fantastic stuff. I know that you have resources. We talked about your sabbatical prep workbook that you've put together out of your experience from coaching all of these pastors. You've created this, and really, I love this because it came out of your own coaching work,
Hmm.
and this was a tool that you use as you're coaching pastors. And then you thought, hey, let's see how we can make this available to that there is greater interest in sabbaticals. It is a tool that pastors can use. And so I love the fact that you put pen to paper and pulled all of your experiences together and all the tools that you use with your coaches, coaching clients and pastors you're working with, and put this book together. So talk to us a little bit about resources for sabbatical, because I know there are a number. There are different books that people can look at, but talk to us a bit about how um, uh, not only the preparation, like the workbook you put together for preparation, but the coaching piece, how those kind of come together as a resource for a pastor who's really looking, because the reality is we're investing a chunk of our time. Right. I mean, this is,
Hmm.
2, 3 months perhaps on sabbatical, sometimes even longer, depends on situation. But you're investing all that time. So you really want to let it be as effective as possible. Right.
Hmm.
And so how do these resources come together and work together to really make that happen?
Yeah, that's great. So yeah, so exactly this thing that I put together is a workbook. It's not like a book about sabbaticals, so it's not like a book you read. There's lots of good books about sabbaticals. This is just the like helping you actually write things down, think it through. So there are kind of three phases to sabbatical coaching. One is the pre-sabbatical, and that's where thinking through your goals, and then beyond the goals is thinking through like some daily rhythms, like what kind of time do I want to spend with God? What do I do with my afternoons? Because again, another big concern is like, what am I going to do with all this time? So I think one big fear of many spouses is he just going to sit on the couch and play video games and watch TV all day? So
Right.
to have some sort of a rhythm for your day that includes time with God, time helping out around your house, time with your spouse and your children, key things like that. So pre-sabbatical, is working through that, thinking through all that. And then during the sabbatical, the coaching is more like spiritual direction. It's more like, what are you thinking? What is God saying to you? What spiritual disciplines are you trying that are working and which ones aren't working? Again, the permission to say, oh, I tried that. And it didn't help me connect with God at all. So during the sabbatical, to have somebody to process with what God's doing in your soul, the positive, the times you feel really sweet and close to Jesus and refreshed, and to be able to celebrate that with someone, and the other times that are more discombobulating, like we talked about earlier, when you go like, "Do I still believe all this?" So
Right.
to have somebody you can do that with, and then toward the end of the sabbatical is to have somebody help you begin to think like, what are the things that God did in you, the rhythms and the patterns and stuff like that, that you want to take with you now back into ministry. Um, what are you concerned about going back into ministry, et cetera? And then once you're back, kind of post sabbatical coaching is like, what's it like to be back?
Mm.
You know, what are the things you delegated that need to stay delegated? And what are things you need to take back on that really are your right place right now in the leadership of the church? So the workbook and the coaching go hand in hand to help that whole process, those three phases of sabbatical coaching, to really benefit the pastor, and then ultimately, I really do believe, benefit the church.
Yeah, definitely. And I love that you brought up the kind of the post sabbatical piece too, because that's one that oftentimes, um, you may not put as much thought into it, as you're going to sabbatical because you're really geared up on, okay, what's God going to say to me during my sabbatical? But
Mhm,
then there's this whole re-entry process, right? And you're coming back in, and God has spoken, and so there's a
mhm,
fresh vision. It might be a fresh vision for the church, fresh vision for
right.
your life. Probably both of those things will be happening at some
Mhm,
point, right? So
mhm,
how do you kind of bring that back into
mhm,
the weekly rhythms of ministry?
mhm,
And share that with your leadership in your local church, and share that with the congregation, and what does that mean for this next season of ministry at your local
mhm.
church? And that's a key part, because if you really think about sabbatical as being not only for the pastor but also for the church, as you, Jay, make very, very clear, that there's that benefit for both, obviously.
Mhm.
um, then if you're not considering that post sabbatical piece and the impact that it has not only on the pastor but on the church, then you might be missing out on some of that, that effectiveness of what that sabbatical time was. So I love
Yes.
that post sabbatical piece. Um, Let me ask one more quick question before we kind of wrap up, because this is one that I've heard, I've bumped into multiple times. I'm sure you have too, and those watching along might be thinking through. And so I
Yeah.
want to ask it. Um, there are times a pastor goes on sabbatical, and when he returns to the church, he ends up, feeling like he's released from the ministry of the church.
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
that's a reality. We know that. I think that is perhaps, and I've heard this actually, anecdotally, I've heard this, that's a fear from the church itself and leadership
Yeah.
in a church of letting a pastor take a sabbatical. I think
Mhm.
to some degree it could be a fear from a pastor themselves. You know what I mean,
Yeah.
right? Like, so can you just and I know it's a big, here I am opening up a huge question right here as we're wrapping up.
Sure.
But it's one of those questions that I did want to touch on, because I know it's one that's asked and wrestled with
Sure.
and processed through so much. So speak to us a little bit about that, because I know you've run into this and you've had to talk churches through this and pastors through this as well,
Yeah.
and coach on this. So
Yeah, yeah. I'm smiling because when I went on my first sabbatical, I had 2, like, opposite fears. One fear was, "Oh my gosh, I'll go away and they'll realize they don't like me or want me," right, on the one hand. Or the other extreme was, I'll go away and they'll find out the church can't survive without me and I'm stuck there forever. So like
right.
these 2 polar, I gotta go back and forth. So we wrote a sabbatical policy for the church that I led. And in it, it said the pastor, whoever's on sabbatical, not just me, but other people on our staff who would go on sabbatical, they couldn't leave the church for 1 year when they returned. Okay. And on the other hand, they couldn't be fired for 1 year after they
Mm,
returned. Now,
interesting.
obviously, if there's something horrible that happened, that could be, but there was a general agreement. We're stuck with each other for a year. Okay. And that kind of gives everybody a little bit of peace, you know?
Right.
So even if one of those two extremes happen where the pastor said, I do feel like I gotta go, you have a whole year to figure that out without just walking back and saying, spent 3 months looking for another job, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Which does happen sometimes. On the other side, if the pastor's the way and the church goes, gosh, it just seems like we're healthier like this, it allows the pastor to come back and have time to process that with the congregation rather than him showing up and they said, we found out we liked it better without you. You're fired, which I know somebody that happened to.
Mm.
They came back and got fired.
Wow.
So you kind of avoid both those anxieties by just saying, okay, we love each other enough that we're going to stick with each other for a year after the sabbatical's over and we'll figure it all out together.
Yeah, that's good. That's a that's a great answer. Actually, I didn't know how you were going to answer that question, and that's the first time I've ever heard that particular answer. So, I think it's fantastic to say, hey, we're going to agree to love each other and stay committed through this, and we'll figure it out. And then obviously lean upon the Spirit and God in the midst of all that. If one of those scenarios arises, and work through it, but at least there's that piece going into it for both the pastor and the church. Excellent, awesome, brother. Well, such great stuff, obviously, and I know we're just scratching the surface on the work that you've done over the years and the work that you continue to do week in and week out. And so, the Sabbatical Prep Workbook, we will have links, guys, to Jay's workbook at PastorServe.org/network in the toolkit for this particular episode. So be sure to check that out. And then also at PastorServe, we are offering a complimentary coaching session. So if you're watching this right now and you are considering or thinking about a sabbatical maybe in the near future, for you at your church, or it doesn't have to be particularly sabbatical. I mean, that's what we're talking about right now. But anything that you might be feeling a little restless in ministry, whatever it might be, a challenge, whatever it could be, you can go to PastorServe.org/free session. And as a pastor, you can fill that information out, and our team will reach out to you, and we'll give you a complimentary coaching session, so you get a sense of what it's like to be coached, as Jay does with pastors all over the country, and our other coaches do as well. So if you are thinking about sabbatical, this is a great opportunity for you to jump on, get a free session. And again, you can check out the Sabbatical Prep Workbook that Jay's put together, and that provides a ton of additional information. And all that can be found at PastorServe.org/network in the toolkit for this particular episode. So make sure that you take advantage of those opportunities, because that's just a way that we at PastorServe seek to help bless pastors and ministry leaders just like you. So, Jay, again, brother, it's always good to hang out with you and chat with you. It's fun to do this and share. Like I said, let everyone else listening to our conversation. It's kind of fun to put this out there and let other pastors and ministry leaders hear. So, Jay, thank you so much for taking the time, making the time to hang out with me today. And I appreciate you, brother, and all that you're doing week in and week out for the church.
Yeah, likewise, Jason. This was a lot of fun.
Awesome, brother. God bless you.
Bye-bye.
Now, before you go, I want to remind you of an incredible free resource that our team puts together every single week to help you and your team dig more deeply and maximize the conversation that we just had. This is the weekly toolkit that we provide, and we understand that it's one thing to listen or watch an episode, but it's something entirely different to actually take what you've heard, what you've watched, what you've seen, and apply it to your life and to your ministry. You see, FrontStage BackStage is more than just a podcast or YouTube show about ministry leadership. We are a complete resource to help train you and your entire ministry team as you seek to grow and develop in life and ministry. Every single week, we provide a weekly toolkit, which has all types of tools in it to help you do just that. Now, you can find this at PastorServe.org/network. That's PastorServe.org/network. And there you'll find all of our shows, all of our episodes, and all of our weekly toolkits. Now, inside the toolkit are several tools, including video links and audio links for you to share with your team. There are resource links about different resources and tools that were mentioned in the conversation, several other tools, but the greatest thing is the Ministry Leaders Growth Guide. Our team pulls key insights and concepts from every conversation with our amazing guests. And then we also create engaging questions for you and your team to consider and process, providing space for you to reflect on how that episode's topic relates to your unique context at your local church, in your ministry, and in your life. Now, you can use these questions in your regular staff meetings to guide your conversation as you invest in the growth of your ministry leaders. You can find the weekly toolkit at pastorserve.org/network. We encourage you to check out that free resource. Until next time, I'm Jason Daye, encouraging you to love well, live well, and lead well. God bless.